There are a number of serious things locally, regionally, throughout Florida that I want to get to with Billy Corben. We will get to serious political matter with Nikki Fried. She will join us later in the show, the Florida Commissioner of Agriculture. She's the Democratic gubernatorial candidate of Florida. We will cover a lot of ground with her later as well. But before I get to Thomas Raynard James, who you have advocated for on this program, he has been released from prison this week after spending too many months after he was exonerated and we found out he was innocent. He still had to stay in the system. Almost a year. He's finally out.
He's been in prison for over 30 years. He is 55 years old. So more than half of his life he has spent in prison for a murder he did not commit. And a year after we knew he was innocent, the state attorney's office finally did the right thing and exonerated him this week, and he is free and home with his family.
We will talk about that in a moment, and we will talk about the book ban, and I want to get to Florida's war between Disney and Ron DeSantis, and if I can just root for the entire state to fall into the earth instead of having to pick a winner there. But before I do that, you came in here...
Root for the flood.
You came in here rooting. You came in here celebrating.
Me?
Yes, because you wanted to talk about, and this is all the information I have at the moment, the butt plug guy who wants to ban the Bible.
Yes, the butt plug guy, who, by the way, is proud to be known as the butt plug guy. He's a Florida activist named Chaz Stevens. We talked about him several months ago. He was customizing care packages and really awards, he was calling them, for like the worst politicians in not only Florida, but all over the country. And the awards were customized giant butt plugs. I mean, giant butt plugs, like bigger than this microphone. And he was customizing them and sending them out as awards, along with various other deviant sexual themed amenities. I don't know, toys. And he's now in the face of the Stop Woke Act, in the face of these insane laws that aren't entirely thought through, but have all kinds of unintended consequences because, it's like Gloria Stefan's love. It's like a knife. It cuts both ways. And he has decided that...
Why do you do that? Why do you do that?
It's Miami. It's because Miami. It's Gloria. I mean, you got to mention Gloria.
You don't have to mention Gloria. We're getting...
It's an act of the county commission. You have to mention Gloria at least once a month on the Because Miami podcast. I'm pretty sure.
You were saying.
There's an ordinance for that. So parents are allowed to lodge complaints with school systems if books or teachers or lessons make their children uncomfortable. That could include talking about the real history of this country, slavery, the Civil War, indigenous people, anything that might make them feel bad. They can lodge a complaint. Teachers can be fired, suspended. Books can be banned. It's happening in the libraries as we speak. First, they come for the books, and they are doing that right now. Dozens of books are being banned across school systems. Tell people what you mean. First, they come for the books, because this isn't quite a playbook, but first they come for the books means what? Well, just like when you learn about profiling serial killers, they say, well, he injured animals, right? Like, oh, someone who abuses animals, there's an escalation from there. When the rise of fascism often begins with piles of books that are against the spirit of the revolution, if you will, in a giant pyre. And that's how that begins. It's control. It's a race history, a race education, and literature that may inspire people to think for themselves or to revolt. And then you start to vilify minorities, Jews, and you start to turn people against them and say, these are the people to blame for your problems, and we're the only people who can help you. And really what you're seeing now is the rise of not simply authoritarianism, but theocracy. You're seeing the deletion of other religious beliefs, minorities, people who don't believe in white Christian nationalism, and the rise of white male Christian power to the elimination of all other thought, government, culture. Women cannot have autonomy over their bodies. People are not free to practice the religion of their choice. People are not even free to vote in fair elections. And we're seeing that it's not even an escalation. We're kind of seeing everything happen all at the same time. And it feels a little bit overwhelming. And it should feel that way because it's extraordinarily alarming for anyone who is a student of history.
It's the reason that we're doing this week and every week is because you need to be giving voice to what the threat is from all sides as it gets filed under politics, but is a race war and a culture war that simply gets filed under abortion rights when that's not what we're fighting over.
Well, it's about that, and it's about the butt plug guy. Because Chaz Stevens, back in 2015, he petitioned 11 South Florida municipalities to either drop the prayer that opens their city commission meetings or let him lead a prayer to Satan, because that would be an exercise of freedom of religion.
You didn't even mention I didn't even make the connection that the butt plug guy who wants to ban the Bible is also a Satanist.
Well, I don't know that he's a Satanist, but he plays one on TV because his position is simply, the activism is, well, if you're going to have a prayer, then, to any God, you have to have a prayer to Satan. And after he made his request, several Florida cities said, well, why don't we just not do this prayer? So under the guise of this law about age-appropriate books or books that make people feel bad or censoring content in books, he has sent a letter from his company, Boner Incorporated. I really wanted to say that with a straight face. Can I try it again?
Is it? Are you making it up, or
no,
is it really the name of the company?
There's a logo.
It's Boner
Incorporate. I'm sorry. I want to really.
What is the first word? Boner.
One word. Boner. Fuck. I really want. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. Boner Incorporated.
You're not going to be able to do it. We're going to.
You're an infant.
No, he is. He is. No, this is the thing. He will keep doing this. We will spend the next 20 minutes before Nikki Fried with him trying to say this. You're not going to do it successfully.
Boner.
You're not going to. You're going to.
Boner Incorporated.
He is.
No, barely.
No,
barely.
We can all do it.
You got that
Billy, we can all do it. You're 4 years old. Boner Incorporated. We'll do it for you, okay? You don't have to do it. It's coming from the company letterhead of Boner Incorporated.
I laugh when you say it.
You will leave a space. Leave a space in your speech.
No.
Read the statement, and then when it comes to say Boner Incorporated, leave the space.
He's not going to be able to.
He signs it at the end, so I'll have to get to it eventually.
Okay.
So
no, you
writes,
have to do it again. You have to do it here on the top end.
There's been like a dozen euphemisms in this last minute.
Boner Incorporated.
Oh, God damn it.
I can't even say Incorporated.
I think it'd be funny if we just did this until Nikki Fried. If we just spent the time here. He's not going to be able
How much time do we have, Roy?
to waste all the time on this precious platform as democracy gets threatened.
I'm not leaving the studio until Billy can say that with a straight face.
This is valuable podcast real estate we are squandering here.
Just
Boner and Associates.
All you got to do is
he can't do it.
He just did it.
The law firm of Boner and Associates. Boner Incorporated.
Continue.
I did it. No? Does that count?
Congratulations.
I feel that counts. Yeah.
We'll give it to you.
Go to the replay. Dear Dr. Dotris, this is the new superintendent of Miami-Dade amongst the districts he sent the letter to. Good day to you. Hope these words find you well. As you well know, Governor Ron DeSantis signed House Bill 1467, which requires school districts to give parents a say in the selection of instructional materials, including library books and textbooks. With that in mind, I wish to file such an objection, requesting the Miami-Dade County Public School System immediately remove the Bible from the classroom, library, and any instructional material. Additionally, I also seek the banishment of any book that references the Bible, and as is often the case with banned books, I ask your agency lay flame to that giant stack of fiction in a pyre worthy of a Viking send-off. My objection to the Bible, being in our public schools, is based on the following points. 1, age appropriateness. As the Bible casually references such topics as adultery and fornication and incest for that matter, or as I like to think, Date Night Friday, do we really...
That's not in there.
It is. Date Night Friday. Do we really want to teach our youth about drunken orgies? And then he quotes from Matthew 15:19, "For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, slander. And then let us walk properly as in the daytime, not in orgies and drunkenness, not in sexual immorality and sensuality, not in quarreling and jealousy." That, of course, is from your favorite Romans 13:13. Part 2 in his objection is bestiality and rape. Taking a cue from the Florida Statute 847.001, one should consider such discussions to be harmful to minors and obscene. From Leviticus, do not have sexual relations with an animal and defile yourself with it. A woman must not present herself to an animal to have sexual relations with it. That is a perversion. And 3, wokeness. With the constant concerns about the teaching of critical race theory, should we not take stock of the Bible's position on slavery? I am concerned our young white students will read such passages and wake up to civilization's sordid past. And he quotes the Bible. And finally, 4, social emotional learning.
Hold on. Billy just walked into the room and asked a
Billy.
question. And when he asked this question, the response was firm and concise.
So what happened is you're reading this quote, and I walk in and I go, "Who said this?" And then in unison, everyone said, "The butt plug guy."
Continue.
What? Wait,
It was orchestral in nature.
Did anyone tell you the name of his corporation?
No, we didn't.
No, Section 4. Let's move it on, Billy.
Section 4.
Come on.
And finally, social emotional learning. The most troubling of issues for many, as it's obvious, once we teach little Jimmy and Susie to show empathy for their classmates, they're one giant step closer to getting their LGBTQ plus freak on. And he quotes from Genesis. It is not good enough for man to be alone, therefore encourage one another and build each other up. That is social emotional learning. In summation, please accept this document as my request to remove the Bible and any referential material from the public schools. In the end, if Jimmy and Susie are curious about any of the above, they can do what everyone does. Get a room at the Motel 6 and grab the Gideons. My very best to you and my sincerest thanks for taking care of our kids. Signed, Bishop Chaz Stevens, ordained in California, Florida, and Jezero County, Mars, First Church of Mars, Executive Director, Shadden Boner Incorporated.
Bishop, huh?
He's a bishop. He's an ordained bishop. And so he is trying to get the Bible and any books that reference the Bible removed for references to sex, incest, bestiality, all kinds of fornication, orgies, because our children should not be learning that for a multitude of reasons.
A thoughtful letter, well put,
Never there was
and
one.
well argued. I want to talk to you about what is happening between Ron DeSantis and Disney. So can you give people the cliff notes on the nature of the conflict and the cliff notes on just Disney's history in Florida? Because Disney has profited a great deal off of having its headquarters in this state, and Disney has employed a lot of people and kind of runs the state. Like, I don't know if this is known nationally, but it is known in Florida. Disney's got more power than anybody's got power in Florida.
Yeah, when you employ 70,000 people and you generate unquestionably billions of dollars in economic impact every single year, you get to, you carry a large sword in this state. And they've been very generous to politicians across the board. It happens that Republicans have controlled the state for, over 20 years. And so obviously they tend to be more generous to those in power and thus the Republicans. But they have been generous with all legislatures and governors, regardless of party. They kind of have to be. But in a funny way, very often even Carl Hiaasen is referred to Disney as the ghost government or the shadow government or the shadow governor and legislature of the state, and for all the reasons we've already said.
Well, tell people about the Carl Hiaasen book, because not a lot of people know about the Carl Hiaasen book.
It's barely a book. It's this wonderful little treatise called Team Rodent they've written back in 2000 about the incredible, extraordinary economic power and political power that Disney yields here. And it doesn't really hold, despite the title, Team Rodent, it doesn't really hold, it's not really vilifying Disney per se, so much as saying that the real estate that they have amassed, and thus the power they have amassed and the money they have amassed, has really, has bought a state in which money and power and real estate matter. And so he doesn't necessarily begrudge them acting in their own corporate best interests, but says that all of the greed that has grown up and out of as a result of Disney has had quite an impact on this state. You know, Miami Beach was post-war. By post-war, I mean World War II. It was the Magic City. It was an extraordinary place. We're talking about Rat Pack. We're talking about glamour and glitz, and the Fontainebleau is at its peak of just luxury.
Vacation paradise.
Paradise. And the entertainment capital of the world, you know, pre-Vegas. I mean, just the greatest entertainers anywhere were here in Miami Beach. And then there was a kind of a 1-2 punch. You know, it kind of peaked in the 60s, and then in the 60s and 70s, two devastating things happened to Miami Beach. The first thing was jet travel, the popularity and ubiquity of jet travel. Bigger planes, faster planes, more of them in the airline's hands enabled American travelers to go to more exotic destinations if they wanted to go to the beach. Miami Beach didn't necessarily become the preeminent beach destination for vacationers. And the second thing was in 1971. Because Uncle Walt opened Disney World in Central Florida. And what happened was the people who weren't getting on jets and flying to exotic destinations were the Griswolds, who loaded their family into the station wagon and drove south. And they never got to Miami Beach because Walt Disney built a dragnet in the middle of the state that captured every single one of those road trip families and kept them in Central Florida, in the middle of a peninsula. Orlando is an hour away from the beach.
Orlando is like the only area, and I don't think that Disney didn't take this into account 50 years in advance, that is hurricane proof because it's in the middle of the state. Like it is hard to hit Orlando. It is not anywhere near water.
This was an act of genius. What Walt Disney started to do was buy up parcels of land under mystery LLCs. So no one could get wind of it's one buyer, right? Buying up all this property. It's like, no, this, Reedy Creek LLC and Rinky Dinky Doo LLC and Walt LLC. And it kind of happened quietly. He amassed a 39 square foot single contiguous parcel of property, tens of thousands of acres. And suddenly he was an instant powerhouse in that way because he was the largest landowner in that part of the state of Florida by a long shot. And suddenly the government had to deal with him. It was a stroke of genius. And he also did it in the middle of friggin' nowhere, in ostensibly swampland. And much of it, if you drive through Disney now, is kind of a swampy paradise. They deliberately left a lot of it undeveloped so that you would kind of escape civilization and suddenly appear in the happiest place on earth. And then suddenly, just like rising like a vision would be the Magic Kingdom and Walt Disney World. It was an incredibly well thought out and designed plan. And what happened was...
If only Miami had that kind of vision. If only anyone in Miami had that kind of vision.
Well, Miami property was even in those days, obviously a little, even during the recession and the oil crisis, was a little bit more valuable because we were closer to the water. That was the thing, too. Who wants to be in the center of a peninsula? You want to be on the coasts of the peninsula. But not now more than ever, people are looking for literal higher ground. So they are moving. The valuable property is further inland. And as Florida starts to recede under the water, Disney might have an extra couple of years or decades on the rest of South Florida. They might wind up being actually a coastal, waterfront property eventually. But
great.
Something to look forward to, Dan.
Jesus Christ.
But really interesting things happened in Orlando. Roadside attractions started to pop up. There was all these kind of satellite businesses and motels and mini golf courses. The Kissimmee St. Cloud Resort area became a kind of a burgeoning mini kind of entrepreneurial area. There has been an interesting shift as Disney and the other theme parks have not only opened but continue to develop all-inclusive resorts, and more of them for every budget level of every family. A lot of that money winds up staying on the property. And what you've seen is, if you watch the extraordinary movie, The Florida Project, it takes place in some of these motels where people who, because of the housing affordability crisis, and not now, I'm talking about years ago, people started living in these motels with their families and children, entire families, extended families are living in these motels, some of which are kind of abandoned, and you go on this strip, that the highway that leads from the Turnpike, the Florida Turnpike, into Disney World, and it's like this sad, weird, lost civilization. The building shaped like a giant orange, and the deserted, overgrown mini golf courses. And it's kind of like this sad, lost part of Florida.
A bit haunting.
Absolutely. And that's because all of and it's not just Disney, but Universal, but they've all kind of created all-inclusive destinations, and all of a sudden the entrepreneurship of the off theme park sites are just completely dried up.
And so what is the conflict? And I can talk to you about this history for a long time. We will revisit it. It's not like Disney's power is going anywhere. But DeSantis against Disney is something that I didn't quite have happening.
Yeah, Disney has this special district. It's called the Reedy Creek Improvement District, and it is effectively a private, self-sustained government. There's 1,800 of these across the state. And they do this for hospitals, so that hospitals can build their own infrastructure and be kind of self-sustaining. They do this for, again, if you have 39 square miles across 2 counties in the state of Florida, you need to build your own infrastructure. There's a lot of stuff you need to do. You need to maintain roadways. And if you go from Orange County or Osceola County into the Reedy Creek Improvement District, shit gets better. There's no potholes. The traffic lights work. Infrastructure is better when Disney runs it. Now, they charge themselves property tax, and they do it in 3 times more than what some of these other counties will charge, and they basically pay it to themselves, and they use part of that money to maintain their district. And what has happened is that in the wake of the Don't Say Gay bill, the CEO of Disney came out and made a statement against it in support of the LGBTQ plus community, and Ron DeSantis didn't like it. And like any good authoritarian would do, he wanted retaliation against the largest employer in the state and said, we're just going to willy-nilly, without any kind of discussion, argument. He sprung this in the middle, or I should say on the eve of a special legislative meeting that was going to deal with redistricting issues, serious, important issues that they didn't bother to do during the 60-day regular legislative session. So it cost us all money to get our politicians back there to actually do something that they needed to do. And of course, they did it in the most corrupt and racist fashion, but we'll talk about that later.
We will talk about that with Nikki Fried in a few minutes. But before we do that,
they dissolved the Reedy Creek Improvement District effective next summer. And they have put the entire 2 counties in a tailspin. It's estimated that with the debt that they now have to take on, that property taxes for just lay people in 2 Florida counties could go up as much as 15 to 20%. So taxes will go through the roof to pay off
just to cover a debt,
to pay off the multi-billion-dollar debt of the Walt Disney.
That's right.
The Walt Disney Corporation, which is insane. Disney is already told their investors, their shareholders, don't even worry about this. This is inane. It's illegal. And we're just going about it business as usual. So this is all performative culture war bullshit.
Disney took a stance that, not Disney, a CEO took a stance by being quoted on something that I was surprised that he said, even though it was the
kind of
most benign of things that he said, but yet I wasn't expecting a CEO of Disney to say anything at all. I was expecting a CEO of Disney to just sit that out entirely, and by saying benign support of the most, just not even fighting for decency, just a benign quote ends up with this becoming the debt for 2 counties in retaliation.
But he took it one step further, and he said, we are going to discontinue indefinitely, or at least temporarily, contributions to politicians who supported this bill. He hit them in their pocketbook, and good for him for doing that. The problem is that you cannot exercise your First Amendment rights in the face of an authoritarian regime. They will ban books. They will retaliate against your private business. So suddenly Republicans are anti-business. Suddenly they're pro raising taxes. as long as they are doing it for corrupt intentions and to punish their enemies.
Billy, if I were to ask you before this incident, what were your thoughts on the state of Florida's relationship with the Walt Disney Company? Would you have presented it in the same light? Because I have to be honest, a lot of what you read about them sounds like corporate welfare, which is what you object to with sports stadiums.
And the Orlando Sentinel did an extraordinary series of stories pre and mid-pandemic about Disney employees, people who are full-time workers at Walt Disney World, who live in their cars in the parking lots at in theme parks and hotels because they don't make a living wage. I think there's a really serious and important conversation to have about Walt Disney World, its relationship to the state, how its employees, 70,000 employees, are treated. The problem is that there might even be a serious conversation to be had about these special districts, not just Disney, but all 1,800 plus of them, including the villages in Florida. The problem is you can do I'm not saying this was the right thing, but you can do the right thing for the wrong reasons. And what I can tell you right now without fail is that they had corrupt intent. The motives were corrupt, they were unconstitutional, and they were retaliatory. I don't want people to do even the right things for the wrong reasons. I mean, I'll take doing the right thing, but this is such a complex issue that affects not just 70,000 people, but at least 2 counties of Florida worth of people that this is a serious piece of legislation that they just said, we don't give a shit. We're just trying to fire a shot over the bow of Disney. And that's objectively wrong, and it's objectively illegal, and it's objectively unconstitutional.
Before we get to Nikki Fried, I know you mentioned it before, but we should celebrate, because you were advocating for it, that after a wrong had been committed, and 30 years of wrong that I don't even know how you rectify, there is a reason to celebrate this week, because I mean it feels a bit like bittersweet celebration, because a man getting off after 30 years of being wronged, after losing more than half his life, and then being exonerated and having to spend another year in the system after that, because the system is incentivized to keep people in prison and makes it a lot harder to get them out of prison than into prison, is something worth celebrating.
This victory belongs to Thomas Rainer James and his family and his attorneys. It belongs to Tristram Corton, who wrote an extraordinary expose last year for this in GQ. Trish is the one who brought it to the attention of Kathy Fernandez-Rundle and the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office. He's the reason why they know about this. Former Sergeant Al Singleton, star of my Cocaine Cowboys documentary, who appeared on this show a few months ago to advocate for this issue. This is a staunch law and order veteran Miami-Dade police homicide detective.
One of the few.
Yeah, homicide detective who said, like, on the show, he goes, "Have you ever told me that I would be, advocating for a drug dealer, to get out of a convicted drug dealer to get out of prison?" He goes, "I'd say you're crazy." He's like, "But what he's not is a murderer." That is what Thomas Rainer James is not. He was a man convicted of a murder he didn't commit, who has spent more than half of his life in prison. And like you said, how do you even freeing him is not enough, because you cannot make up for that lost time with his family. But Thomas Rainer James, in a case of mistaken identity, they were looking for another guy named Thomas James who lived in Coconut Grove. They found their way to this guy. They arrested him. The eyewitness incorrectly identified him and recently recanted that identification. And finally, after nearly a year, actually, I think almost after a year, of the state attorney's office in Miami-Dade, who, according to Al Singleton on this show, said they could have done this investigation in 2, 3, 4 months tops. It took them a year, but, justice delayed is justice denied. But I can't imagine that saying means anything to Thomas Rainer James, who is a free man, and rightfully so, today. And thanks to the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office for finally doing the right thing.
We're going to talk to Nikki Fried here in a second, but you lured her out into a statement with your propaganda with David Sampson, your mini documentary. You forced a lot of politicians to make statements on Mel Reese and the soccer deal. So what do you want people to know before we bring Nikki Fried on here?
The thing that I resent most about these sports welfare deals, not just the Mel Reese deal, and I'd love to see a soccer stadium here in Miami if they could just negotiate a good deal for a change in this public-private partnership. But what I resent most is that we hear from our government all the time that we can't do this, we can't do that. We can't do affordable housing. We can't do sea level rise mitigation. We can't improve our crumbling infrastructure. We can't restore the Miami Marine Stadium that has sat, this extraordinary gem that has sat empty and deteriorating since Hurricane Andrew. We can't do any of that. But the second a billionaire says, I want a stadium, everything stops. The city government shuts down and everybody goes to work for this guy, whoever they may be. Okay? And the city attorney and the city manager and the city commission and the mayor. I mean, the resources, the man hours, the woman hours, the millions of dollars they have spent, $3 million and counting, on outside counsel and consultants, all in service of this deal, whether it passes or not. We're getting nothing done for anybody. And Nikki Fried finally said we need a better process here in her statement this week. And most importantly, she said, not only the Commissioner of Agriculture and Consumer Services here in the state of Florida, but as a candidate for governor, she's been traveling the state. And from Pensacola to Miami, nobody's saying, Commissioner, you know what we need now more than ever in Florida? A new stadium.
All right, well, let's talk to her about it instead of to you. Before we get to Florida's Commissioner of Agriculture and the best hope for democracy in Florida, if DeSantis is not to take over and embarrass yet more of the state that I call home.
There's a primary, Dan.
Okay, we'll get to all the politics and the order of this in a second, but we're bringing her on first and foremost because of this Mel Reese Stadium thing at the front end on tying it to the sports welfare that
what Mel Reese Stadium thing?
That Billy has been crusading about, making videos about. And Whittingham, I'm just wondering where you are, your feelings toward Billy at this moment as he teams up with David Sampson and does a lot of unctuous campaigning all over the country with the comedy duo of Sampson and Corben, once enemies, now comedic colleagues.
This is going to be an instantly dated take, Dan, by the way. Whatever. Just heads up on the freezing cold. I'm just saying timing-wise.
Hold on a second. I'm sorry. I'm hearing myself echo here. Can you guys?
Billy, your computer speaker might be on.
Oh, fuck.
That's
I'm
okay.
sorry.
No, I'll start over. It's okay. Forgive me.
I can pick up.
But I'm also concerned, though. Because if they don't vote tomorrow,
he's
it's fine.
I'm sorry. Okay, I just wanted. Yeah,
I'll address your.
He's worried about the timeliness of it.
It's all good.
And so let me just. Should I start over? Or
No. I'll pick it up. I'll pick it up.
You'll fix it from there.
I'm stunned at the amount of publicity that Billy Corben and David Sampson are doing together. This is by far the most unlikely of partnerships. And I will say, Billy, this is no longer on you. You've started the fire that you wanted to start. And now, as evidenced by the fact that we have someone who could potentially be running for governor in the state of Florida here on the program that weighed in on the issue. Every local figure has weighed in on the issue. Every former city manager, every major political figure in this area has now had to once again establish their stance on this.
It feels like Billy has been self-congratulatory here and running around, getting the applause,
he should
taking the victory
honestly,
lap.
I think Billy should be incredibly proud of the work that he did here. If you believe on behalf of the city that this should be a deal that is more negotiated on behalf of its citizenry, then 100% mission accomplished. Now, I do disagree with some of the elements of the argument, which are, this was voted on by the city of Miami voters. The no bid lease was voted on by the city of Miami voters. And I personally, as a citizen, would think this is a better use of that land than what is currently there now. But those are my personal objections. Judging your political advocacy, I can only admire it because now it's no longer in your hands. It's in the hands of the people who actually have the power.
I will say this, that every time I talk to David Sampson, I have to take a shower, so I've been taking a lot of showers.
No, you don't. You're fine now. You're fine now.
A lot of showers.
You say
this
you
past
hold your
week.
nose when you call him, but you've been
that.
calling him a lot lately. Nikki Fried, she is the Democratic gubernatorial candidate of Florida, and thank you for being on the show and tolerating.
She is one of them, and to correct Chris, she is not potentially running for governor. She is running for governor. She's running. Full stop.
Yes, full stop.
Thank you for being on with us. You had to weigh into these waters, and is it because Billy forced you out into the light, and now you're forcing everyone else out into the light?
No, it's a kind of a twofer. First and foremost, for those who don't remember or don't know, like I was born and raised in Miami, as were my parents. So anything that goes on in Miami-Dade that changes the landscape is something that I want to be involved in because I care so much about my home county. And the second is, as our only statewide elected Democrat, these are issues that I've been dealing with up in Tallahassee. The lack of transparency, seeing behind the closed door deals that get done, and the people get left out of the conversation. So felt it was necessary to lend my voice into this conversation, again, to raise the issue of transparency and making sure that the people have a seat at the table.
You made news this week by coming out with a statement. I won't be so bold to say or independently say in response to the mini documentary that we made, but it was embedded in your tweet along with the statement that you made that deals of this magnitude should always be executed in the sunshine. There should be an abundance of community engagement, a wealth of public input, and full stakeholder investment before one single shovel goes into the ground. If that takes years, then so be it. I guess my question would be, in Tallahassee, as governor, what is it that you could legislate here? What bills could you sign to accomplish that?
Look, it's a lot. First of all, it's just enforcing. First of all, you always have to look inside your mirror, look at your mirror first and look inside of yourself. And so if you are not doing these things at the state level, then local governments are going to get away with it too. And so that's been one of my biggest criticism of the Republican Party, and especially those in the DeSantis administration, is that we're not doing that. I mean, we've seen land deals come before the Board of Trustees, which I'm a member of, being on the cabinet, and seeing a lot of deals that are for developers that are going against environmental issues. You saw that down in Dade County, dealing with the expansion of the expressway. And so if we're not holding our standards at the state level, how in the world are we encouraging people to do it at the local level? So those are one things. And then, of course, looking through ways. I never want to take away power from local governments, but there's got to be ways in which there are such huge land deals like this, where you're taking public property away from the people and putting it towards a private purposes. There's got to be new mechanisms in order to perpetuate that.
You have said, among other things, that nobody, as you travel the state, is asking you about a new stadium here because of the number of things that plague the state. So what do you see as the foremost substantive, real issues plaguing the state? Not the noise and the newsmakers of the moment and the nonsense, the real stuff.
Yeah, I've been traveling our state, not just, this past year, but as commissioner for the last 3.5 years. And everybody from Key West to Miami-Dade to Central Florida to North Florida to the Panhandle are saying the same consistency: affordability, that people cannot afford to live here in the state of Florida. In fact, this week, an article came out that Florida is the #1 state now that people can't afford to live in. Everything from rent increases to property taxes to property insurance, gas. Did everybody understand that there is a gas relief, tax relief in a single month? Not today, not yesterday, not tomorrow, October. That's right before an election. So if everybody kind of sees where Tallahassee politicians' minds are and their priorities, but I'm hearing affordability everywhere we go, and people are really struggling out here. I'm seeing and hearing stories of people being evicted from their apartments, can't make their rent. It's a bad situation here in our state, and South Florida in particular is the largest rent increases that we've seen across the country. So we got to fix this. In the last month or so, last few weeks, last several months, some of the legislation that is coming down the pike, I can't even imagine how appalling you're finding some of it, but can you just take us through what you view as some of the worst of what you see making its way through the sewage system in Tallahassee? We don't have enough time for all of it. It's everything. I mean, look, they had 60 days in a legislative session where they didn't tackle any of this. There was no conversations about property taxes. There was no conversations about rent. There was no conversations about Surfside. I mean, my God, I think not what 96 people died. No bills that passed this legislative session, no issues. Instead, we focused on taking away a woman's right to choose what is best for herself and for her family by banning abortions at 15 weeks. The governor this week signed this new voter protection on his new police force, which is only geared towards actually creating intimidation for voters at the polls. We are banning books. We are banning books in the state of Florida. First, it was like this whole oh, it's only math books. And I saw an article this week that also listed in every county tens of books in each county, including Judy Blume. Judy Blume is being and Kite Rider and Toni Morrison. I mean, these are not. I'm appalled. And we can keep going on and on about not having diversity training now, not only in the public sector, but the private sector. I mean, the list of issues that this legislature tackled this session that were not the priorities of the people of our state. It was all this anti-woke agenda, not talking about the issues, talking about how Ron DeSantis can run for president in 2024.
And the Republicans voted to end the Reedy Creek Improvement District, the so-called private government that Walt Disney World runs in Central Florida to be able to maintain its tens of thousands of acres. It's 39 square miles of property in 2 Central Florida counties. And Disney just put out a statement this week to its investors going, just ignore it. It's totally illegal. There's nothing that can be, it's business as usual. But this seems to be the case. There's a lot of lawyers among the lawmakers in Tallahassee. There's a lot of legal staff and consultants who tell them going into a lot of this legislation that doesn't help any Floridians. It only hurts people. And one of the state's largest employers, Disney. And maybe there's a real conversation to be had about special districts or even about Disney, but they didn't have that conversation. This was just a retaliatory strike against Disney for exercising its First Amendment rights to criticize what they thought was bad law here in the state of Florida. But my point is that these lawmakers know going in that a lot of this stuff is illegal, but they don't care because then they spend our tax dollars, millions of them, in fact, to hire outside counsel to litigate stuff that they know they're going to lose. But for them, they're using public money basically for campaigning. Right? They're using it to say, look, we're fighting these culture war issues and it just looks good in campaign ads and flyers and things. No?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, they know all of this stuff is unconstitutional. How many over the last 3.5 years bills have been passed by this legislature and signed by this governor that have then gone to the courts, and along the way they've even dropped the cases because they were losing in the courts. Look at the anti-protest bill from last year. Look at the other voter suppression bill from last year.
The social media, the social media bill is
look at even what they did, and again, for people who are listening, we had a special session last week. So not only bad enough that they wasted taxpayers' dollars from the 60 days of regular session, they brought everybody back up and on our taxpayer dimes to deal with a congressional map that was already unconstitutional because the governor put forth his own maps, which again has not been done in a modern history, and took away minority access districts. And so we know that's unconstitutional. And then they add on there the Disney situation and a last minute attempt to punish a corporation that is the largest employer of the state. And Billy, to your point, look, if there is a real conversation to be had about these special districts, about what is going on here, sure, great. Let's have that conversation. Let's do the economic analysis of it. None of that was done.
There's also 1,800 of them or something in the state of Florida beyond just Disney, which of course is the biggest and most famous and successful.
Don't forget the villages.
And of course the villages, Republican and STD bastion there. But But this is an intricate
What just happened there? How did it become an STD bastion? Why couldn't it have just been Republican?
No, the Village is the STD capital of like the country.
Old people love to have sex. I just thought that was gratuitous.
The Democratic frontrunner for the governorship is on the line.
Yes, I mean, like, let's have some respect. Like,
she knows. She's been there. She wears a mask and gloves, but she's been there.
I don't want.
I'd wear a hazmat suit. I'd wear one of those naked gun full body condoms if I went to the Villages for crying out loud.
Needs to hear how you would dress if you had to make your way into the sexual orgy that is old people having sex in nursing homes. Look at the smile on your face. What is the matter with you? We're talking to somebody.
First of all, more power to them. You know, like, let's also take a step back.
Sure.
Like,
I don't begrudge them.
70 years old and 80 and 90 years old, and you're like living your best life. Like, more power to you.
Yeah, no, I don't begrudge them that. I'm just saying.
Soak them with STD.
I'm just saying there's a reason why they vote the way they do, and it's syphilis.
Go out with a bang.
That's what I'm saying.
You will not convince me that you said STD neutrally.
I'm also saying that the commissioner is not shocked. She is literally running for governor of America's phallic symbol. Okay, so none of this is stunning or breaking news. But my point is that these are complicated conversations to have that involve multi-billion-dollar multinational corporations, the largest employer in the state of Florida, the billions of dollars in debt that apparently now the state and or the counties, these two counties, might be responsible for. This was done so recklessly and willy-nilly. And even if it was the right thing to do, which I'm not saying that it was, what I'm saying is you could do the right thing for the wrong reasons. And these were they had the most corrupt intent here, which was to silence this company and its officers from expressing their discontent with a single act of legislation in the state.
And I think, Billy, to that point is, look at the unintended or intended consequences that you're going to see these huge tax increases on the people that are living there. There's going to be a question about the type of services that they're going to be provided. And what message does that say to the rest of the corporations that are here in the state? Oh my God, if you dare speak up on a policy or an issue or giving a campaign donation to another candidate, that the retribution that comes from you is out of control. And what does it say to any other corporation or business that wants to move into the state of Florida? They're going to take a second look.
Well, that's absolutely the message, is to intimidate. They even said if Disney decides to change its position on the Don't Say Gay bill, that maybe they'll revoke this because it doesn't come into effect until June 2022. But that's all nonsense anyway. They're talking about raising property taxes for people in Osceola and Orange County by as much as 15 or 20% per residence to pay off the debt of Disney, for crying out loud. This is totally reckless and flies in the face of everything that conservatives and Republicans claim that they stand for ideologically, which is pro-business, which is lower taxes. I mean, this is just an absolutely hypocritical, retaliatory attack on the First Amendment. And I didn't want to gloss over the redistricting issue. I think you covered it, but there are two congressional districts that were deliberately black majority districts that sent two black Floridians to the United States Congress. The balance of powers, the separation of powers here in this state hang in the balance here. This is a constitutional crisis when the legislature throws up their hands and says, you know what? The governor vetoed our redistricting map. We're just going to pass whatever this authoritarian, this dictator decides. And
you've been wanting to talk about this for a couple of weeks because this encroachment is it's deeply constitutionally offensive. Can you explain to us, Nikki, what's happening with this redistricting where the power is just you're carving up the map to make sure that black people have less power?
Yep, and that's exactly what happened. And I think that, when we have to also take a step back and think through this governor is the first governor in modern day history in the state of Florida to propose their own maps. Typically, in our Constitution, this power is given to the legislature to draw maps, not just for the House and for the Senate, but also for our congressional maps. And so they have to do this every 10 years after we finish the census, and to make sure that the maps are purely, cut to the point that they're representing the people of the state of Florida. And this governor not only filed his own map, but he did it on MLK Day. Like, this was an intentional going after the minority access districts. And I've been saying this since the day he filed this map. That was his intent, to get these maps to the Supreme Court to actually unravel and to dismantle the Voting Rights Act. This was intentional. And so anything else the Republicans are saying to couch this in, I think I heard some insane argument over the weekend that Democrats have been doing these maps for 100 years. And just now we've got the opportunity to fix it. The last time I looked, the Republicans have been in control of our state for almost 30 years. So this is a disingenuous, trying to hide the ball, what's happening here. This is a direct attack on our minorities in the state. And I just want to do a big shout out. There was a protest that happened on the floor of the House that day where the Black Caucus stood up and fought back, and they left everything on the field. And I am just so proud of the members of the Democratic caucus that stayed in unity and fought these racist maps. But we got to now look at what the courts are going to do with it, because I don't have, unfortunately, faith right now in that system.
I usually look at performative acts like that is somewhat in a somewhat cynical way, if you can imagine me looking at anything cynically. But I will say I was really quite moved by it. It was an incredibly emotional and obviously passionate moment for the people on the floor who are trying to hold on to even just some minority power here. And I don't mean just minority, based on African American. I'm talking about minority like Democrats don't really have, people of color don't really have power in the state. So what little power that we have, it's like, give us a chance, to have some representation, and to have, representation that looks like the districts and the people of the districts. And instead of trying to disenfranchise everybody.
Billy, I heard a heartbreaking story. I was doing a Twitter space that night with some of the members of the Black Caucus, and hearing through and some other, Black leaders in our state. One of them was talking about how bringing their daughter to meet with members of that staff and seeing somebody that looked like them representing them, and what inspiration that was to the next generation and getting involved in politics. And now those opportunities for the next generation to see people that look like them in leadership and in elected positions just got taken away from these young girls and boys. And hearing those stories and putting just a face with it and emotion to it and seeing what that actually means for our democracy is so heartbreaking. And this governor and his Republicans just don't care.
I don't want to gloss over any of these serious issues. So my last question, to circle back to this election police, a real staple of Republicanism these days is to create demons and then slay them. This election police bill is all inspired by the big lie. It's all inspired by this lie that voter fraud, massive voter fraud in multiple states, led to the election of Joe Biden, which was somehow fraudulent, and Donald Trump actually won by some landslide. This is all a lie, a bold-faced lie, but Republican legislatures in multiple states, and now including Florida, are steering into this lie after DeSantis himself said that the 2020 election in the state of Florida was the safest, most secure, and successful election. Even in these 6 states that Trump was disputing, out of 25.5 million votes, there's only something like 450 incidents of possible fraud, and even some of those are accidental or inadvertent. People who didn't, who didn't know they couldn't vote or voted twice by accident, or whatever it is. It's nonsense. So, what does this election police, which in and of itself is a frightening sort of headline, what does this election police actually do? It's not designed to make elections more secure, because we know all of the election fraud that was committed in the state of Florida over the last couple of years and in 2020 was all by Republicans. Shill candidates, people voting multiple times in the villages for Donald Trump, not for Joe Biden. So what is the actual goal here? It can't be to make more people vote. It can't be for easier access to absentee ballots and drive up ballot drops. What is this actually designed to do? Is it just really to disenfranchise people?
Yeah, it's create intimidation. That if you are somebody who has just moved to our country and have just gotten their rights, and this might be your first election that you've ever voted in, or you're coming over, let's say, our Puerto Rican neighbors that are now living here in the state of Florida, and you don't really understand, the continental United States voting process, you're going to be scared to show up. Maybe I'm not supposed to be voting. Maybe I'm not supposed to be voting here. And now you're intimidated by these official police officers, that are going to be standing here. And it's all about intimidation, because because you're right, Billy, that all of the fraud that we have seen across our state in the last few election cycles are by Republicans. And so I've said consistently, all right, Gov, you have your election police. Hopefully they're being stationed and sitting in the Republican Party's headquarters, because that's where the fraud happens. And also note that they did not put in here that they have the authorization to even investigate and go after those shill and ghost candidates. So they intentionally made sure that was not part of the responsibilities of the police.
They protected the Republicans' biggest scam, basically, and voter fraud, election fraud tactic here in the state of Florida. Mostly, this is like the governor creating a chupacabra police to go hunt. Like it's election fraud is not only extremely rare, it's also imminently detectable. Like we know it when it happens, and local state attorneys and prosecutors handle it when they have to, and they rarely do.
Nikki, thank you for being on with us. You have an awful lot to fight. It sounds overwhelming, and it sounds largely helpless. It is depressing to talk to Billy every week.
No, it is definitely not helpless and hopeless by any stretch of the imagination. That's what I do. Is I wake up every day, I see these issues, I bring light to them, just like what you guys do. Make sure that there is an elected official in our statewide, that has a microphone, that has a bully pulpit, and brings light to these issues, so people know what's going on, that things are not happening in the shadows and in the cloak of darkness. That's what we fight on. That's why transparency, wrapping up to our first part of our conversation, why transparency is so important, and accountability. Because if not, all of these things go unchecked, and that is not what democracy is supposed to be about.
Thank you. We appreciate the time.
Cocaine's.
Thanks for having me today.